The meaning of a name can have significance. It's interesting to know what your name means. My middle name is Merle, most which I have used all my life. My first name is Ezra. Now, I was named for my grandfather. My mother's father was named Ezra, and so when I was born, I was named Ezra Merle. I suppose Ezra Merle sounded better than Merle Ezra, and so they put my grandfather's name first. Um, Now, when I was young, I didn't use my first name. I didn't. It wasn't a popular name. As a matter of fact, in the year I was born, out of rankings of popularity of the name Ezra, it was like 900 and something. It barely made the top 1,000 names for boys in the United States. In 2019, it was in the top 50. It was number 49. So it's really changed. It's become much more popular now than it was in the 1950s. As a matter of fact, some years in the 1960s, it didn't even make the top 1,000. Uh, and it hung around in the 900s as far as the most popular name for most of the 50s and 1960s. Um, and so I didn't really use my first name. I didn't wasn't that familiar with it. People didn't know what it was, but yet on official documents, my first name was there. And sometimes when I would go for services, of course, they would use my first name. And I remember one time when I was just young, I was a preschooler yet, I went to the doctor, and the nurse was asking me, "What's your name?" And I knew that my first name wasn't Merle, but I couldn't remember what it was. And I knew it was my grandfather's name. So I told her, "My name is Grandpa Merle." And from then on, when I went to the doctor's office, they would always call me Grandpa Merle. But as I got a little older, I didn't like my first name. I was kind of sensitive about it, and I didn't really like my first name. I didn't want people to know what my first name was. It just seemed like an old-fashioned name, and so I didn't. I used my first initial. I would often use E as a first initial, so it's E Merle, but I wouldn't use my first name. And if people would ask me what my first name is, I would say, "Well, I don't really tell people what it is." When as an adult, when I came to Canada, and I went at one point in when I went to get my driver's license renewed, they told me I cannot get my driver's license in my middle name. I must get it in my first name. And I said, "But I don't use my first name. No one knows my first name. I never use my first name." And they said, "Well, that's the way it is. If you're going to get a driver's license, it has to be in your first name." And I told her, "But it's not going to do any good to put it in my first name because no one will know that I go by that name." I was saying if I would be in a traffic accident and the police would look at and I'd be killed, and the police would look at my driver's license, and then they would call my wife and they would tell her Ezra Burkholder was killed in a traffic accident. She would say, "Why are you calling me?" So it's no good. And she said, "Well, if you hate your first name so bad, go to court and get it changed." I said, "Well, I don't want to do that, but I don't really want it on my driver's license." But she won. I had it on my driver's license. 5 years later, when I got my driver's license renewed, they left me put my first and my middle name on my driver's license. So now my driver's license has both my names on. However, uh, about 10, 15 years ago, I started to think about who Ezra was. Like, Ezra was a good person. When you look at Ezra in history, a man who was a Jewish scribe, scholar, and he was a good man. And there's a very interesting verse in the Bible in Ezra 7, verse 10, where it says that Ezra gave himself to the study of the law, to doing it, and to teaching it. And I like that sequence. You know, Ezra, he studied the law and then he did it himself and then he taught it to others. And I would hope that I could be a man like Ezra who studies things, learns how to do them, and then helps others. You know, the name Ezra means helper. And it's actually a very good name. Today it's becoming more popular. And often when I call somewhere now and I have to use my first name, and since 9/11, when I fly and travel by air, I have to use my first name. And so often it's not unusual today when I call somewhere and I tell them what my first name is, and I say my name is Ezra. They say, "Oh, that's a powerful name. That's a strong name. I really like that name." I didn't hear that when I was a teenager. And names are interesting because they say something about the person. When I was little and we had foster children, we would get to name them and we would get to choose the name. And my mother would take care of them until we would get them right from the hospital when they were born, and then we'd keep them until they were adopted. So usually we had them from a few months to up to a year, and then the adoptive parents would give them a name that they wanted. But in the meantime, we could name them whatever we wanted. And at that time, there was a cartoon character that was named Huckleberry Hound, and there was a cereal company that had spoons made. One spoon had Yogi Bear on it, the other one had Huckleberry Hound. And my mother, we got those spoons out of the cereal boxes, and my mother used those spoons to teach us how to hold the spoon, because you had to have the spoon so that the handle came up between your thumb and your finger, and so Huckleberry Hound could be on the spoon, but you had to be able to let Huckleberry Hound breathe. You couldn't hold him like this and use him as a spoon. You had to hold him like this, so Huckleberry Hound had to be up so he could breathe. And that's how my mother taught us how to the proper way of holding a spoon. So we were really into Huckleberry Hound and Yogi Bear. One time we were getting a new foster child, and my little sister said, "The next time we get a baby, let's name him Huckleberry Peanut." But we never did. We never did name a baby Huckleberry Peanut. The name is significant, and now I like the name Ezra. I use it on official documents, and I'm not embarrassed to tell people that my name is Ezra. I want to be a helper. I want to be a person who studies things, who does them, and then helps other people to learn how to do them as well.